In a Rome marked by splendor and crises, a girl destined for a life of holiness and service was born in the year 1384. Saint Francis of Rome came into the world in a noble family, the Bussa de Leoni, where she received a refined education and a solid Christian upbringing. From childhood, she nurtured a profound desire to consecrate herself entirely to God, already indicating the paths of grace in her life. Her heart longed for a life of withdrawal and prayer, but her family had other plans. As was customary among the nobility, Francis was betrothed to a young man of good lineage, Lorenzo Ponziani, a man of noble and honorable character. Obedience to her parents' will led the young woman to accept marriage. Even though it went against her deepest desires, the wedding took place when Francis was only 13 years old. Despite her inner vocation to the religious life, she accepted her new mission as a wife, seeking to transform her home into a space of love and charity. Lorenzo, a good and generous man, understood his wife's spiritual fervor and respected her deeply, allowing her to maintain her life of prayer and service to the poor. In the Ponziani household, Francis found support in her sister-in-law Vanozza, who shared her devotion and desire to help those in need. Together, they began to transform the family's palace into a refuge for Rome's poor and sick, distributing food, clothing, and spiritual comfort to those who needed it most. Although she had wealth and material comfort, St. Francis never allowed herself to be bound by the world's riches. Her days were divided between family obligations and service to the most needy. Amid the difficulties and demands of married life, she cultivated a deep intimacy with God, sustained by prayer and the Eucharist. God tested her faith through great challenges. Francis had to face the pain of losing two of her children who died when they were still young. Far from distancing her from the Lord, this suffering strengthened her trust in divine providence. With resignation and love, she offered her sorrows to God, understanding that her true homeland was not of this world. The plague devastated Rome, claiming thousands of lives and leaving a trail of misery and despair. Without hesitation, Saint Francis of Rome devoted herself to caring for the sick, taking those infected into her own home. Risking her life, she gave herself to the service of the afflicted, without fear of the danger that surrounded her. Amid the chaos, her charity became even more evident. Francis not only provided for the material needs of the sick, but also comforted them spiritually. Her presence was a source of peace for those who suffered, and many found in her words the hope they lacked. Her reputation for holiness spread throughout Rome. Many came to her for advice and comfort. Her spiritual gifts were visible. She had heavenly visions, dialogues with her guardian angel, and the gift of discernment, making her a spiritual guide for those seeking God. War and political struggles that plagued the city also affected her family. Her husband Lorenzo was wounded in combat and left gravely weakened. With patience and love, Francis devoted herself to his care, showing that her charity began within her own home. Despite the tragedies, her faith never wavered. On the contrary, her sufferings became opportunities for an even greater love for God and for others. Her surrender was complete, and her heart burned with a desire to serve, not only through material charity, but also through spiritual guidance for those who sought her. Her mystical experience became even more intense. Reports indicate she constantly saw her guardian angel, who guided and protected her. These spiritual gifts did not distance her from reality. On the contrary, they made her even more available for service to others. Over the years, St. Francis of Rome realized that God was calling her to an even more dedicated life. She founded the Congregation of the Oblates of Mary, a group of women who, without abandoning secular life, devoted themselves to prayer and to serving the poor, following a monastic spirit in the world. Her charism inspired many women to follow the same path. The Oblates of Mary did not take religious vows, but they lived in community dedicated to prayer, service to the poor, and the pursuit of holiness in daily life. Although she founded this congregation, Frances did not withdraw from her family responsibilities. She continued to care for her husband and her home, showing that holiness can be lived in any state of life. Her profound union with God became increasingly visible in her life. She frequently went into ecstasy during prayer, being carried away by visions of paradise and receiving divine revelations. Even amid her mystical experiences, she never neglected her love for others. Her home remained a refuge for the poor, and her words a source of solace for the afflicted. Her fame for holiness grew, and many sought her intercession and guidance. She was not only a benefactor of the poor, but also a true spiritual mother to many. Despite her physical frailty, Saint Frances never ceased to serve. She faced difficulties with courage and trusted entirely in divine providence. Her example was a living testimony of God's love amid life's trials. The city of Rome, which so often suffered from wars, plagues, and divisions, found in Frances a sign of hope. Her name was synonymous with charity and holiness, and her presence was a blessing to all who knew her. Over the years, her life was consumed in service and prayer. Her desire to unite herself completely to God grew, and her soul longed for the definitive encounter with the Lord. When her husband passed away, Frances was able to devote herself fully to the community of the Oblates, living with them in simplicity and holiness. Her example continued to inspire new vocations and strengthen the work she had founded. In her final years, her spiritual visions became even more frequent. It is said that her guardian angel appeared to her constantly, guiding her and preparing her for the great encounter with God. On March 9, 1440, St. Frances of Rome surrendered her soul to the Creator, surrounded by her sisters and disciples. Her death was not marked by pain, but by a celestial peace, like someone who finally attains the home she had always desired. Her legacy remained alive in Rome and throughout the Church. Her holiness was officially recognized, and in 1608, Pope Paul V canonized her, granting her a definitive place among the saints of the Catholic Church. After her death, devotion to St. Frances of Rome grew rapidly. The people of Rome, who knew her as a mother of the poor and a consoler of the afflicted, began to invoke her as an intercessor with God. Her tomb became a place of pilgrimage, where many faithful went in search of graces and miracles. Her canonization by Pope Paul V in 1608 was the official recognition of her holiness, but the fame of her virtuous life had already spread for centuries. Her example of charity, humility, and prayer inspired both religious and lay people to follow the path of service to others and the quest for everyday holiness. The Church confirmed many miracles attributed to St. Francis's intercession. The sick were healed, families were restored, and countless faithful found peace and hope when praying for her help. Her name became a symbol of spiritual strength amid life's trials. Among the most striking aspects of her life was her profound devotion to the guardian angel. She testified to several appearances by her protective angel, who guided and strengthened her in times of tribulation. For this reason, she became the patron saint of drivers, because just as an angel protects travelers, St. Frances of Rome intercedes for those who journey through life's roads. The monastery of the Oblates of Mary continued its mission after the death of its foundress. The sisters kept alive the charism of St. Francis, dedicating themselves to prayer and service to the poor, perpetuating her work of love and holiness in the heart of Rome. The Church has always highlighted her life as an example that holiness can be lived in any state of life. As a wife, mother, and widow, St. Frances of Rome demonstrated that it is possible to find God amid the responsibilities of daily life, transforming the surrounding world through small and great acts of charity. Her love for those in need knew no limits. During epidemics and crises in Rome, Francis never hesitated to go into the streets to aid those most abandoned. Her heart burned with compassion for those who suffered, and she saw in every sick and hungry person the very face of Christ. The miracle of the multiplication of food in her home was one of the signs of her faith and generosity. It is said that, in times of scarcity, when provisions were almost gone, she prayed and trusted in divine providence. Miraculously, grains and bread were multiplied, allowing many poor families to be fed. Her humility was a defining characteristic. Despite her spiritual gifts and reputation for holiness, Francis never considered herself superior to others. On the contrary, she saw herself as a servant of God, called to love and serve without expecting recognition or earthly rewards. During her life, she faced opposition and criticism, especially from those who did not understand her radical commitment to the gospel. Some accused her of exaggeration, but her unshakable faith and her trust in God always supported her in times of difficulty. Her husband, Lorenzo Ponziani, became a great supporter of her mission. Initially, he had difficulty understanding the depth of his wife's vocation, but over the years, he saw a true saint in her and began to encourage her in her work of charity and prayer. Her love for the church was unquestionable. Even in times of internal divisions and conflicts, Saint Francis of Rome remained faithful to Catholic doctrine and tradition, teaching by example that true reform comes from holiness of life and fidelity to Christ. The visions she received throughout her life included revelations about heaven, purgatory, and hell. These mystical experiences caused her to grow even more in compassion for souls and in prayer for sinners, offering sacrifices for the conversion of those who were far from God. In one of her visions, she described purgatory as a place of purification, where souls received the help of the prayers of the living. This motivated her to intensify her intercessions for the deceased, encouraging others to do the same to alleviate the suffering of needy souls. Her guardian angel was her faithful companion throughout her life. Accounts indicate that he instructed her, protected her, and even rebuked her when necessary. This angelic presence became one of the most fascinating aspects of her spirituality. The city of Rome recognized Saint Francis of Rome as its patroness, alongside Saints Peter and Paul. Her love for the city and the Roman people was evident in her dedication to those in need, especially in times of crisis and war. The church dedicated to her, located in the Roman Forum, became an important place of pilgrimage. There, her incorrupt body is venerated by the faithful, who find in her story an incentive to practice charity and prayer. Saint Francis of Rome's influence extended beyond Rome. Her life and spirituality inspired many people around the world, including religious, lay people, and even popes, who recognized in her a model of faith and service. Her life's testimony remains relevant. In a world marked by selfishness and indifference, Saint Francis of Rome teaches us that the true path to God lies in love for our neighbor and complete surrender to the divine will. Devotion to Saint Francis of Rome is a call to trust in divine providence. Her life shows that even in the face of adversity, God never abandons those who surrender to him with a sincere heart. Her example continues to echo in the hearts of the faithful. Many families find in her a powerful intercessor, especially in the difficulties of marriage and raising children. Her love for Christ in the Eucharist was immense. Whenever possible, she spent hours in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament, recognizing there the source of all strength and grace for her mission. Even when faced with trials, she never lost her interior peace. Her trust in God was her greatest security, and she knew that everything worked for the good of those who love the Lord. The teachings of Saint Francis of Rome continue to illuminate the path of many Christians. Her testimony reminds us that holiness is possible in any circumstance of life, provided we have a heart willing to love and serve. Her liturgical feast, celebrated on March 9th, is an opportunity to remember her life and ask for her intercession. On this day, many faithful turn to her in prayer, thanking her for her protection and example. The legacy of Saint Francis of Rome has surpassed the centuries and remains alive in Christian spirituality. Her life, marked by sacrifice, service, and deep intimacy with God, inspires the faithful to live the gospel in everyday life. Her name became synonymous with charity and strength. Many women, especially wives and mothers, find in her an example of balance between family life, prayer, and commitment to those in need. The spirituality of Saint Francis of Rome was deeply rooted in humility. She did not seek recognition or earthly glory, but only to please God and serve her brothers and sisters. Her life reflected the gospel phrase, "The greatest among you must be the one who serves." Her dedication to her family was never an obstacle to her holiness. Rather, it was the field where she cultivated love and patience. Francis showed that the calling to marriage can be a true path to sanctification. Her life of prayer and penance strengthened her soul to face life's challenges. From a young age, she understood that intimacy with God was the key to overcoming trials and remaining faithful to her mission. Even in the face of the political and social difficulties of her time, Francis remained steadfast in her faith. She believed that true societal transformation began with personal conversion and the Christian witness. Her love for the poor was not limited to giving alms. She insisted on being close to them, knowing their sorrows and needs, seeing Christ in every suffering face she met. The community of the Oblates of Mary continued to flourish over the centuries. The seed planted by Saint Francis of Rome kept bearing fruit, inspiring other women to live a life of prayer and service. The monastery of Tor de Specchi, founded by her, remains to this day a center of spirituality and refuge. Pilgrims visit the site to learn more about her life and to seek inspiration for their journey of faith. Her devotion to the guardian angel teaches us to value that heavenly presence in our lives. Francis reminds us that God sends his angels to protect us and guide us on the path to holiness. The feast of Saint Francis of Rome is celebrated with great devotion in Rome and in many parts of the world. On that day, the faithful gather to thank her for her intercession and renew their commitment to charity and prayer. Many drivers and travelers turn to her as their patron saint, seeking her protection on the roads. Just as her angel guided her throughout her life, Saint Francis of Rome is believed to intercede for those who are on the move. Her influence on Christian spirituality is also reflected in sacred art. Many churches and paintings depict her image, usually accompanied by her guardian angel and surrounded by symbols of charity and prayer. Her example teaches us that holiness is not reserved only for religious, it is a call for everyone. Saint Francis of Rome showed that it is possible to be a saint in marriage, widowhood, and service to others. The words and actions of Saint Francis of Rome continue to resonate within the Church. Her life invites us to total surrender to God, trusting in divine providence in all circumstances. Many couples turn to her for intercession, asking for wisdom and patience to deal with the challenges of marriage. Her story proves that a holy family life can be built even amid difficulties. Her dedication to prayer was accompanied by a deep love for the Scriptures. Francis often meditated on the Word of God and put it into practice through her charity and humility. During her life, she endured persecutions and misunderstandings, yet she never responded with bitterness. Her answer was always love, patience, and prayer for those who criticized her. Her unshakable faith gave her the strength to continue, even in the darkest moments. She knew that her power came from God and that He would never abandon her. The Church continues to promote her memory as an example of faith and charity. Many priests and lay people study her life to learn from her wisdom and her surrender to God. The witness of St. Francis of Rome is a reminder that holiness begins in small things. Her simple acts, caring for the sick, feeding the hungry, were concrete signs of God's love in the world. Her spirit of service invites us to step outside ourselves and seek out those most in need. Francis teaches us that true happiness lies in giving ourselves to others without expecting anything in return. Her spirituality was deeply Christocentric. Everything she did was directed toward Christ, and her greatest desire was to conform herself to Him in all things. Many mothers who have lost children turn to her for consolation, as St. Francis of Rome also knew that pain and faced it with faith and hope in the resurrection. Her love for sinners led her to pray constantly for the conversion of souls. She understood that God's mercy is infinite and that no sinner is beyond the reach of divine forgiveness. St. Francis of Rome's example continues to inspire many people to seek a life of greater surrender to God. Her witness shows us that it is possible to live in holiness even amid daily occupations and challenges. Her humility and simplicity were hallmarks of her spirituality. She did not seek recognition or grandeur, but served in silence, trusting that God saw and valued every small act of love. Devotion to her spread not only in Rome, but in many parts of the world. Churches and religious communities honor her as a model of faith, charity, and commitment to the gospel. Her love for suffering, united with Christ, was a source of strength. Francis understood that life's tribulations were opportunities to draw closer to God and to offer sacrifices for sinners. St. Francis of Rome teaches us that true power lies in complete surrender to God. Her life was proof that prayer and service to others are the surest paths to achieving holiness. Her role as wife and mother sanctified her family life. She lived marriage with dedication and love, showing that a family can indeed be a true sanctuary of God. Her patience in difficulties was remarkable. In times of war, famine, and plague, she never lost hope, trusting fully in divine providence. Even after her death, her spiritual presence continued to be felt by many. Accounts by the faithful tell of graces attained through her intercession, further strengthening devotion to her. The monastery of Tor de Specie remains to this day as a witness to her mission. The place is a center of spirituality, where many seek inspiration for their faith journey. The story of St. Francis of Rome reminds us that holiness is not reserved for a select few, but is a universal call. Anyone, in any state of life, can follow the path of holiness. Her love for silence and contemplation was an essential part of her spiritual life. Even amid her daily tasks, she found time to be with God. Many miracles continue to be attributed to her intercession. From physical healings to resolutions of family problems, St. Francis of Rome is still seen as a powerful mediator before God. Her connection with the angels reinforces the importance of heavenly protection. She teaches us to trust in the presence of guardian angels and to ask for their guidance in our earthly journey. The testimony of her life is an invitation to conversion. Her example challenges us to abandon selfishness and live with our hearts turned to God and to our brothers and sisters. Perseverance was one of her greatest virtues. Even in the face of countless difficulties, Francis never gave up her mission, trusting that God would sustain her. Her love for the poor reminds us of the need to look toward those most in need. She not only offered material goods, but also care, attention, and hope. Her fidelity to the Church was unshakable. In times of division and crisis, St. Francis remained firm in the faith, teaching by example the true meaning of obedience and ecclesial communion. Many priests and religious find in her a source of inspiration for their vocation. Her balance between prayer and action makes her a perfect model for those who wish to serve God and neighbor. Her name continues to be remembered in prayers and celebrations. Every year on March 9th, faithful around the world gather to honor her memory and ask for her intercession. The message of her life is clear. Holiness does not depend on circumstances, but on the disposition of the heart. St. Francis of Rome teaches us that with faith and love, we can transform any reality into a path to God. The impact of her work is still visible in the city of Rome. Her legacy remains alive, and her spiritual influence continues to touch the hearts of many. Her example invites us to trust more in God and to abandon ourselves into His hands. She teaches us that divine providence never fails and that God always cares for those who trust in Him. The life of St. Francis of Rome reminds us that true greatness is not found in power or riches, but in the ability to love and serve. Her witness is a beacon for those who seek to live the gospel authentically. She shows us that, with humility and charity, we can transform the world around us. St. Francis of Rome continues to intercede for all of us, teaching us to follow the path of holiness with joy, courage, and faithfulness to God. Her example invites us to seek holiness in the ordinary, transforming our lives into a reflection of divine love.